analog communication, physical gatherings. It's something that I think in 20 plus years of pastoring ministry, that something I feel very comfortable being in is in a physical gathering and curating the message in those gatherings. And of course, everything has changed. Actually, it's been forced upon us. And for an institution that historically is slower to change, when change is forced on you, of course, there's a measure of anxiety and fear and the unknown and all of those things that go with it. And of course, each of us, as we're listening to this across Canada right now, each of us had different levels of preparedness, didn't we? Like I know our church had already been dipping our toe in this pool of the digital world for the last 2 years, running an online church gathering. But even us, we've had to make sudden adaptations and changes and responding to the world that just shifted underneath our feet. So I want to encourage you just to keep an open mind. I recognize that some of you are digital natives. You don't struggle with digital interfaces or the idea of communications through digital tools, and I understand that completely. But I want to invite, I think we have something to help you with, to maybe look up from your phone, just not the screen though, as we help you learn about communication in a larger narrative. As well as if you're not a digital foreigner, maybe you feel like, man, this has been thrust upon me. I'm learning this on the fly. I do think we all have that in common, though. Right now, the church has never been here, and we'll never go back. I think we need to let go of some of our thoughts about returning to what was so that we can recreate or actually create a new future for the church. This is actually holds quite an opportunity in this moment. So if you're not already, I invite you, jump in the chat room, say hi to, tell us where you're viewing from. And I'm going to introduce everyone. Sorry, I'm getting text messages while this flies. I'm going to introduce everyone here that is going to be presenting in this live stream. So first off, we have Dawn Paine. And Dawn is, I'm so thankful that you joined us, Dawn, from the United Kingdom. Dawn is the former UK marketing director of Nintendo. She oversaw the launch of such products that maybe little products you may have heard of or not, things like called the Wii and Nintendo DS. I don't know if you heard of those, but actually she was, actually I'm getting text messages, Richard, that we're not actually streaming on YouTube right now. So I'm wondering if we might check our feed, because I don't know if anyone's hearing us. Sorry, guys. I think I'm just getting text messages from Jessica saying nothing streaming. Okay, well, Bart's saying he's in and he sees it live, so we're off to a great start here, guys. I'm not seeing it on my screen, but obviously there must be another feed coming. Great, that's great. Thank you. So I'll wait for that link. Sorry, friends, and we'll jump back into this with the conversation, and I'll finish introducing Dawn and Jerry and Bart. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I already know that there's this is going to, because I know some of what they're going to share, this is going to expand your mind and your thinking about actual communications and what we could be doing in this moment. If, you know, like every trouble or struggle, if you can just reframe it in the context of opportunity, that makes all the difference. Now I see we're live here. Now, friends, let me start by, again, introducing our presenters. Dawn Paine is the former UK marketing director of Nintendo. She oversaw such releases as the Nintendo DS and Wii, and actually her part of leadership as the VP of marketing there was the most successful years of Nintendo in its 110-year history. I didn't even know Nintendo had been around for 110 years. She was also the vice president of marketing for Universal Pictures, and she was the mastermind behind the releases of over 50 movies and television shows, little ones like Despicable Me. I don't know if you've heard of that one, or little ones like Les Mis, or there's this TV show that I don't know if you've heard of. It's called Downton Abbey. Maybe if you've heard of that, that's her stuff. So she did all of that. I love what she comes with a strong background in marketing disruption, kind of ripping up the rule book, and is the founder and CEO of Extraordinary Thinking. So glad to have you here, Dawn. Thanks for joining us. And then we have Jerry Sen. Jerry is a transformative digital marketing expert. Jerry has given leadership to digital marketing for Pepsi Canada, for Maple Leaf Foods. Many of you in Canada, it's one of the biggest food providers. And he was in charge of taking all of their marketing, digitalizing it, and maximizing that across Canada. He's worked for Google. He's worked for DoubleClick. Jerry is a marketplace leader, and he's utilized his skills and opportunities in Toronto, not just for corporate good and for balanced bottom lines of businesses, but he's really become an asset to the church. He serves actually at One Church TO as a directional leader here. And he's taken all of those expertise from the marketplace and has helped us locally. So I know you're going to enjoy Jerry's voice. And then we have Bart Anniston. And Bart, again, I think Bart's the only one that's kind of come out of the church world. Dawn and Jerry are speaking into the church world. And now Jerry just more recently has become a part of what we do as a not-for-profit. But Bart has been a pastor in the past, but he's also been a designer and creative mind in church settings. But more recently, he's the lead designer and owner of the Creative Partner. Now, maybe Richard, you can throw into the chat room links to Bart's business and what he's doing. It's a Toronto-based studio. He's helping not-for-profits and churches find their voice in a very crowded marketplace and amplifying their voice in this connected world. He's a solutions-minded person. So he's one that's been able to cut across the noise with practical and tactical tools to help not-for-profits and churches succeed. And then our host in our chat room is Richard. Richard Tendererang. Man, Richard, I'm going to struggle with that, I think, until I die. It's the rolling of the R's. But Richard is a musical genius and a communication genius. He's the music pastor at One Church TO, but he's a rap hip-hop artist. You can find him on Spotify under his stage name, Komodo. But a great communications guy, and he's going to be curating your questions in the chat room. So I invite you, if you're not already in the chat room, jump in. Be prepared to give us great questions or comments or thoughts as we begin this interactive dialogue. So I'm going to give you 5 seconds. Everybody just say hello before we jump into the next question.
Hi, guys. Happy to be here.
Hello.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, nice to meet you all.
Okay, friends, let's jump right into things. Glad to have you online. I see a lot of you guys already in the chat room. Thanks for doing that. Just tell us where you're viewing from too. Just keep jumping in there and tell us where you're viewing from. And Richard will be monitoring it throughout our questions. So I want to start with Dawn. Dawn, I'm so glad that, as I mentioned earlier, that you joined us. I want to ask you a question about, because I was first exposed to your work through a mutual acquaintance we have. And this acquaintance kept quoting you and pushing me to define the why. Why do we do what we do as a church? And it all came from conversations that he had with you, and it produced a lot of interest in what you were saying and a lot of interest in what you were curating for not just for corporate entities, but also for not-for-profits. So my question to you is, can you speak to the question of why and clarify why that's so critical to communications? And on the front end of that, I'm just going to let everyone viewing online recognize if you missed the introductory part, we're really trying to lift you up from your screens right now and really think macroly about communications and where the church is going and what's next. So Dawn, can you answer that question about why?
No problem. Before I do that, I did just want to say a huge thank you to yourself, Jonathan, and to your team for giving me a really lovely platform to kind of have a bit of a chat, hopefully add some value. I do feel like something of an interloper with my background being amongst your community today. But I guess it's kind of symptomatic, I think, of where we're at as society, that we're at such an interesting inflection point that it's bringing together all types of different communities. So, hey, I'm the entertainment lady that's suddenly in the world of kind of faith and Jesus, which is really interesting. I think for me, I think the why question is fascinating right now, because I think society is at this kind of reset, quite existential moment itself. And I guess for me, I'm a real nerd, I guess, when it comes to marketing. So I studied it at university, I lecture in it, I'm a practitioner of it. I've worked with big companies, small companies, and everything in between. And I think for me, I think that the first thing I usually say to anyone when they start to think about their communications and their marketing is actually, and to quote Simon Sinek, who talks very eloquently about this, we have to start with the why. And what I often see is, I think that we have this kind of paradox whereby, because the world has become so digitally democratized, that everyone is a content creator, everyone can be a marketer. What it means is that there's now so much posting, so much white noise, and there's so much clutter compared to what there ever was before, that I think if you're not really clear around what your purpose is, so the answer to what is the why is, what is your story? What gets you out of bed at night? You know, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What drives you? And I think when you think about Simon Sinek's model around the role of why from a marketing point of view, it's really that idea of people buy into things innately from an emotional point of view. And I think that gets very lost in marketing communication. And quite often the marketing that doesn't land and the communication that doesn't land is more functional and not coming from a very deep rooted place. And I think the clearer you are around what your why is, and whatever that why is, it doesn't matter so long as you stand for something. That then has to inform every single touch point of your values, of how you then kind of build out your marketing, what your initiatives look like. But I think it's that the emotional engagement is key. And that typically will be the piece that will enable you to cut through with your communication, because if you're clear about what you stand for and you're very single-minded about that, then chances are you're going to be able to you'll be able to be quite different in how you communicate. And I know we'll come on to talk about differentiation and how one does that. But I guess that would be my kind of first starter for 10, really, which is, before you jump into your marketing, really spend time on what your why is. And I guess from the world that you guys are all in, there isn't a better why than what you have. And I think that because the world has slowed down and is in a mode of, I guess, forced experimentation right now, I think there's a really interesting opportunity, I think, for religion to kind of have a new moment, because it's the why that everyone needs in their life at the moment, of that stuff which is going to energize us and give us that bit of hope, and I guess pull us through the other side, really.
Can I just follow that up with a question then, Dawn? Because I think I do feel like we're curating the greatest message known to humankind. I do feel like that, and I feel the responsibility of that. But you certainly, in your experience, whether it was with Universal Studios or Nintendo or any of the other firms you've been working with or not-for-profits,
yeah,
I'm sure you've seen people confused about the why.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, and this is off script, but just a little bit, what are some of the signs that we're not clear on our why? What are some of those things that really helps identify the fact that an organization, even the church, could not be fully clear about their why, that they're confused about their why?
I think if you're not able to articulate it really simply, it kind of, and again, I will probably look at this through almost quite a commercial, dare I say, entrepreneurial lens of, if you can't really articulate it in a way that people get it reasonably quickly, I think that there's probably a lack of clarity there. And I think the other piece would be, I think when people know what you stand for and what your why is, I think that's when you can when your brand or your organization starts to have, I guess, what we would call in kind of marketing, a real stickiness to it, that people kind of get it. So I think there's almost an instinctive piece, I think, with people of if they don't get it, your communication just isn't going to land. And I think when your why is clear, I think what you'll see from a digital marketing point of view is that your engagement is going to be much better. Because if you're just pushing out messaging and people aren't understanding your why, you're just not going to get the same engagement and cut through from people. Right. Whereas I think if it's really resonating with people, again, we can kind of track this in terms of our digital metrics, and all of that data that we have at our disposal now almost enables us to kind of make sense of that really quite deep rooted stuff. But I see it all the time. I see an absence of why continuously. I mean, particularly if I think about the world of startups, there are so many different companies all broadly doing the same thing, and not too many of them have really kind of thought through what the why is. And again, I think I was very blessed and fortunate during my time at Nintendo in particular, to work with a deeply philosophical and very kind of spiritual leader who infused that why in a very corporate way, I guess, but almost evangelically within the organization. So the line of kind of clarity that flowed through, that codified everything we did. And I guess just to bring that to life, I think Nintendo, I mean, it's so resonant right now, really. If I think about we and what our why was with that proposition, it was to bring people together and make people smile. I think even now, if I look at, because I'm still a gamer, if I look at Switch and if I look at things like Animal Crossing, and anyone that's kind of played those types of games, that sensibility and purpose flows right through everything that organization does. So yeah, just some thoughts on that.
That's fascinating, because we're talking about a technology driven company, but they're actually not driven by the technology. The technology is serving that greater why, right?
Absolutely. And Nintendo is I mean, I could talk for hours about Nintendo, but I mean, Nintendo has been around for over 110 years, and it's an organization that has always been thinking about community, bringing people together, in a way that no one else was. There was never the kind of graphics technology arms race that obviously our competitors were in. And it was always coming from a place of, what do we do that's different? What's our secret sauce? We're not playing the kind of space race with everybody else. We're doing our own thing. And a couple of kind of references, actually, just to perhaps mention that are maybe quite interesting for anyone that's listening, in terms of this area of how can one be really fundamentally clear around their why and what makes them different. A couple of really good reads that are just probably worth a mention. Nintendo, our whole launch strategy of the Wii was based on a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. Highly recommend that. We did a pretty good job by following that book. Another really interesting book, I'm a big fan of Seth Godin, Purple Cow. Really interesting, just in terms of, it's so obvious in a sea of normal cows, be purple. And there's another perhaps slightly more provocative book with some really quite bold theories, is a book called Different, by a Korean writer called Young Mi Moon, which is also a really good read as well. So yeah, I think why is just has never been more important than what it is now, in the world that we live, which is so sadly deeply distrustful. People are scared. There's fake news, misinformation. That ability to trigger trust is going to be so valuable, and I think it's a really, really interesting opportunity for your world, really.
Well, I know in our conversation in preparation for this talk, I couldn't help but think of how much the church at large, and I'm going to generalize for all of our listeners right now, has often been known for what we've been against than what we've been for. And our why and the message of the why is often distorted by
Yeah.
that, either a negativity or a need. Nothing smells worse than self-preservation. There's a stench to it. And when organizations, even whether they're for-profit organizations, and it comes down to self-preservation, you realize when you get to that level, you'll do whatever you need to survive, and that will contravene your values. It'll contravene your messaging, all of those
Yeah.
things. Yeah. Well, so let me move to Jerry. And Jerry, just on the back of that, because I think this is a fascinating conversation about this big why, because you during this season, you've been encouraging and keep telling me that we're in the middle of doing a rewrite of what you call it, a rewrite all the time, of church world, moving things from analog space first, because I think we are an analog organization. Even as we do digital giving methods, all that kind of stuff, we still are a pass the plate organization. We're about physical gatherings, analog moments. And any of us who are doing digital offerings or digital moments, we've just taken the analog one and made it digital. But you're saying we're going to need to think on the other side of COVID-19 of producing the digital one and then allowing the analog one to flow out of it. Why don't you talk a little bit about the rewrite and some of the work your team's doing around it?
No, thanks, Jonathan. I was nodding my head constantly, I think, through Dawn's conversation there. It was just kept going on and on. I was like, I'm hearing a lot of what Dawn's talking about when we talk about the why, and she's right. Like, we do have one of the most compelling whys, and when I talk about the rewrite's more about how. So how are we actually doing church in a COVID world and a post-COVID world? And a lot of thoughts have been going through my mind in terms of what that actually looks like. Jonathan, as you talked about, we might be planning things around specific moments. That might be a Wednesday midweek situation or a gathering or a weekend thing. But one of the most important things we have to remember is your spiritual life is a daily thing. And, in terms of our role that we play as church leaders and as churches around the city, how do we contribute and add value to people's lives on a regular basis beyond just a physical moment that happens a couple times a week? And, a good chunk of your people that come through the doors, a few thousand people on any given weekend, they may be there that weekend, they may be there during a midweek, but there's a significant opportunity to connect with these individuals over the entire week, over the entire month, over the entire year. And kind of pointing it back to what Dawn was talking about is, we know what our why is, but how are we delivering our message? And what does that actually look like? If we build up physical moments as the only touch point for people to connect with, we're missing a big opportunity in terms of how we connect with people the rest of the week. So, some of the things that I've been thinking around, a term that I've used for many years is called always on. We are living in an always on world, and our teams, specifically to the team that I'm running over at onechurch.to, is called Church Life. And when you think about it, it is about your life. And how does our team help people to know God, love people, and impact the city 365 days a year? So those are some of the things that I've been thinking around. And we're rewriting everything. Here's a really good example of something that actually just happened last night. We had put on this event, a digital event, for all the women in the church. And it was kind of leading into this weekend for Mother's Day. And we wanted to give all the women in our church an hour off to chat amongst each other in a digital world. We had like over 150 women join in on that. That's an initiative that didn't exist prior to COVID. It's happening right in the middle of COVID. The women who jumped on, had a phenomenal time. And what it did for us is actually it rewrote our entire women's ministry in literally through one initiative. Because we're looking at that and we're saying, okay, hold on a second. That's something that adds a lot of value to this group, and we can do that on a monthly basis. And we can actually use that digital space for them to come meet when the time is right in a physical environment. They could come meet back up again, and they would know each other, and there would be momentum already built. And essentially, we just rewrote an entire ministry, custom tailored to the content for women and all through the digital landscape. So, it actually changed everything for us in terms of how we thought about that ministry. But when you think about that and how that can affect your entire organization, from what Dawn was talking about is around your why and then your how, you're talking about restructuring teams, roles, responsibilities, focus, all of it gets changed because you're thinking digital, and then you're thinking how that digital builds momentum back into the physical. And, to sum all of that up, it's essentially you're rewriting how you do church. You're not rewriting the message. You're rewriting the methods. And that's just some of the things that we've been thinking about.
Yeah, it's funny, Jerry, I know in conversation with you, I know that digital and technology for most of us listening right now are tools that we are exploring and have used in the past to amplify what we're doing in an analog world. And we're really trying to, even with the way we structure our teams and everything, at One Church Deal, we're trying to inverse that we're thinking of us being digital, and then out of the digital flows these analog experiences. If you go to a Raptors game, and I've used this analogy a few times, but I was thinking of Jerry and I were talking earlier this week. If we went to a Raptors game, and Dawn, they're our local NBA basketball team. So she's in the UK, so I don't know if you know the Raptors, but
champions. You forgot to say champions. You forgot to say champions.
What was that? What was that again, Bart?
We are champions.
The NBA champions. That's right. And if you go to a game there, you notice though they do TV timeouts, and everything around it is organized that the digital offering is a big priority. Why is that? You got 25,000 people in the room watching this game, and they're put on pause for this digital environment. Why? Because in the digital world, you've got 1.5 million people watching, or 2 million, or 3 million, whatever it might be. So you recognize, even as we've seen in COVID-19, we've watched our digital numbers just skyrocket. And we recognize a little bit of our actual capacity missionally has been amplified overnight by necessity. And we know this, that we are creating new behaviors and new attendance patterns, new giving patterns, all of these things that we didn't anticipate. And we're watching even older generations leapfrog their technology. So no longer are they just, all of a sudden when they couldn't see their grandkids, they figured out FaceTime pretty quick. And we realized a lot of this was not can't do, it was more won't do. And so now we realize, as people can do, even as our seniors are doing digital giving now, they're loving it because it's so much easier than writing the check or going to an ATM and getting the cash or whatever it might be. So I'd encourage you, as you think about communications, thinking digitally first, analog second will be a real shift in your team's thinking. So on the backdrop of that, Bart, this is a great chance for you to jump in here because you've been journeying with people throughout COVID-19. And I know you were before and you will be after, but you've been dealing with not-for-profits and churches, and you've seen them responding to this crisis. And I'm sure you've seen some good things, and I'm sure you've seen some things like, oh, brother, why don't you hire me to help you? But can you talk a little bit about how you've seen people responding to the current crisis?
Yeah, definitely. Firstly, I got to give kudos to both Jerry and to Dawn. What they were talking about is vital for any industry, especially with a message as important as the church's. And above all things, I'm excited because we have an opportunity to innovate in this space at this time with this whole coronavirus going around and with people's behaviors and accessibility changing. We're going to see a lot of great things happen in the future. But at the same time, the first thing I noticed, because I do help a lot of churches and I'm in that world, was the scramble. the scramble of people trying to figure out what to do next. And statistically, churches are a little bit always behind the trends. We're not necessarily trendy folk. And what does that mean for us, right? Because the internet is not a new idea. The internet is 20 years old. So this has been something that has been available to us for quite some time, but we haven't thought about it in a way that would allow us to see engagement. So in the same way that you just mentioned, Jonathan, that, you're going to see a spike in your digital appearance just because that's the only place they can get it, and they will have to solve those type of problems to get that type of information. So churches who have been relying on analog first, that can only work for so long, and that can only work for a certain way, because there is no such thing as the old normal. That what we used to understand as normal is now changed. And even in the church world, that also is going to have to change. So it's not even so much change, but as acceleration. We were already moving very digital. We were already moving towards that. A lot of even smaller churches were on the cutting edge of putting their stuff on Facebook Live, and you know what I mean? Like, they were just being bootstrapping and being more like guerrilla style. I'm just going to make it happen and get ourselves online because that's a great way to get more people than what we've been having before. But I think with this situation that we're in, we're actually propelling ourselves forward a couple years than where we were, maybe 3 months ago. And that has required people to allow themselves to engage in a way that's new to them. So think about having to do church or communion or greeting time, as we call it in church, all digitally. And how does that actually affect my response? And how do I change my mindset? So there's a few things that I've noticed already from the 2 months that we've been at home. The first thing is how long we are in front of our computers. How long are we spending in front of our screens? And a lot of churches are showing a service for an hour and a half. Like, they've basically replicated the in-person experience online. And that can work to an extent. And a lot of churches, that has been their bread and butter even before COVID. But as we continue down this path, it's going to be harder for people's attention to hold out for that amount of time, because now it's not, when you're in an in-person environment, you have control of the stage and of everything so that you can knock that ball out of the park and present that message. But now that you're home, it's very different. Some people are baking in the morning. There's kids around. We're trying to clean up. There's a lot of things happening. So when you want to go wide, you have to, that's something that is for online. If you want to go deep, that's something that's in person, because you can control all those elements. You have kids ministry to take care of kids. The lighting is just right. The temperature is just right. The stage is lit to focus on the person. Everything has been set up for you to communicate that. And I think we have to switch how we think about church, especially in this moment, in terms of timing, timelines. Instead of trying to fit everything into one moment, you now have access to the 168 hours in a week and say, how am I going to deliver hope and meaningfulness to my audience during this time? And I think above having a platform or a stage or a room where we can create a moment, we just have to eliminate that word room or building from our mentality and say, okay, I'm going to be the arbiter of hope and peace in this time, and I'm going to show it and showcase it to all those who are around. And if that means that I have to go on Facebook, then that's where we got to go. And if I got to go on YouTube, that's where we got to go. And if we got to do, smaller moments and have more engaging moments that way that are more personal, because people are hurting and people are anxious in this time, and they need hope and they need peace. And we happen to have an abundance of that at this time. And I really do believe Jesus is our chief innovator. So as he went out, walking place to place, going to people, drawing in the sand, teaching through parables, we have to be that same innovative way and go to place, find where those people are at, and show them and teach them about how we can live a way that honors God, but not just through You come to us, we tell you how to do it, all that type of stuff, right? In a sense, that's kind of how church has been. We have the building, we have the chairs, we have the kids ministry. You come to us, we'll tell you the message. Where we now have to flip it on its head and actually go back to first century in the 21st century and say, listen, we're now going to go as much as we can to you, because even more so in this time, there is a greater need for that spirituality in people's life. And how do we make it fit in the new lifespan that they're now feeling? 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day is a lot more accessible to people than having something that, let's say, is an hour in a week accessible to people.
Wow. I feel like Dawn and Jerry and I should be, and Richard, if you're there too, we should be doing the amen moment, because you are preaching there, Bart. But that leads beautifully into the next question for Jerry, because I do think, having been a part of architecting gatherings, analog gatherings since 1992, when I first began to pastor, I know that we put a lot of our staffing dollars, energies, and I think even if you're leading a not-for-profit and you're listening to this, you have those stakeholder moments that we tend to put a lot of our resources right into that moment. And our conversation has been probably like a lot of you who are navigating this world. It's not so much like I love how Bart said, we used to say, come to us and we'll give you the message. And now we don't want to starve our digital offerings because to prop up our analog. We want to really maximize those digital offerings. So our conversations is often now, how do we push all of that focused moment out into the week? I like how Bart mentioned how many hours we have in the week to make connection to people. Now, of course, you could spam people, and I think that's overdoing it, and especially if it's not a quality experience. Because I think every time we touch somebody from our place in ministry, and it's not a quality experience, it wasn't well thought through of, and we just threw a camera up in front of something happening, we are giving people another reason why not to tune in on those key moments we want them to be there. So I even think, and we talk about it around here, even as our next gen team and other teams want to touch people, we're being careful to curate that though, because they could be spamming the same people we're trying to connect with, the same families. So we have to be careful how much, because we got to recognize we may have 5 or 6 teams, depending on the side of your church, even if you have volunteers team, all connecting, but they don't see it that way. They see it as, this is one church TO coming to my living room again. So I'm going to talk to you, Jerry, because you're leading a team right now, Next Gen and others, that are pushing content into the week. So I want to ask you a little bit about how you're creating those touch points for people and how you're curating them even. And what are some of your guidelines around whether or not you continue? Because I'm sure there are things you've started, you're just like on the next flip page, you're going like, we tried this, or this was good initially in COVID-19 because people needed to see us a lot. But talk a little bit to that, Jerry, how you curate those moments.
Yeah, totally. I think a couple of things that just resonated with me, what Bart just said, and I've been thinking about those things too, is acceleration, fast forwarding. Like the world has gone a crash course, including churches, on digital. And everyone's capacity to learn has gone up dramatically, and their willingness to learn almost kind of been forced into this entire environment, into the digital world. And both individuals, churches, all organizations have gone into that. The other part that he's talking about is around lives. So these are lives of people that we're talking to, and we have to monitor what we're saying to them, how much we're saying to them, how we're doing it, and basically the tactics that we're using. One of the I'll take a slogan out of from Apple. It's one of their older slogans about think differently, or think different. That's essentially what their slogan is, and that's been sitting with me for a while. There's 3 kind of people I would think that you want to think like when you're building some content moving forward, and I'm using some occupations here. The first one is think like an author. And an author wants to write something that's of high value. The number one reason people read people's stuff, if you're an author, is because it's interesting, it's engaging. You want to hear it, you want to learn about it, you want to flip the page and read the next page because it's exciting. And there's a high value exchange that's going through there. Second one I would say is think like a tailor. Not all the messages that you push out there can be take one brush and apply the entire part of your entire church with that same message. Jonathan, to what you talked about, it's all coming from onechurch.to. So you can't necessarily take it and spread it like crazy, and you're just getting bombarded with everything. So think like a tailor. How is this message custom tailored to the audience that I'm speaking to? And in any given church, you've got a multitude of different offerings and different people that you're speaking to. So how are you breaking that down into a niche target and then speaking to that group in that way? And I would say, our church does a pretty good job at that, whether it's our next gen team talking to our youth and our kids, if it's our adult ministry team or church life team talking to seniors, those formats are completely different for the target that they're speaking to. And if you watch some of the content, they're completely different in their level of excitement, the backgrounds that they're using, the amount of time that they're expecting for the audience to stay engaged. We live in a world of shorter attention span, so all of it has been custom tailored to the group that is sitting in front of their computer or on their phone and is about to press that play button or is about to watch something live. The last one I would say is think like an accountant. Probably not the role that I love to think about, but I've seen myself. I actually in the last couple of weeks look at numbers like I've never been in my life. Basically, is take every piece of content that we've been doing, look at the numbers, look at the analytics. Is the engagement rate high on this video? Has it been tailing off? Is there of high value? Should we still be doing this piece of content? And then what can we do to make it better? And all of those things, thinking like these types of occupations and trying to think like them and how we produce content, it has been very helpful. Some of the guidelines, shorter bursts versus something that's too long. Another thing I've talked about is targeting towards your target and who's listening. And then the last one is more about if you're going to put a lot of value and time in creating a piece of content, what is your strategy to get that content out? Is your content easily shared? Do you have paid media put against the content? You're putting a lot of time and effort in building this content, and it may not be tailored for just the people inside your church. It might be written for the people in your church and the people outside of your church. So really thinking about, before you create the content, how can that content be spread beyond just your doors?
Man, that's so good, Jerry. I think a lot about Jesus as being the master communicator, and he had a way of communicating to people outside and inside at the same time. But it meant that he had to find commonality. So like in order for everyone, whether it was the Pharisees and those religious leaders and all the religiously steeped people, as well as the people that were prostitutes and destitute or just marginalized or maybe just not as engaged, he found common stories and common narratives that connected to them. And that speaks to a greater level of engagement. And I love how you talked about data points and metrics, even evaluating. I learned this a long time ago, and I'm speaking to my ministry friends right now. There's two types of data. There's anecdotal data, which I think church leaders have specialized in because they're stories of transformation and change, and they're powerful. So, but I think anecdotal data should only be used in vision casting and storytelling. Decisions should be made on actual data. I feel like we've made in church world a lot of mistakes by making decisions based on anecdotal data. So, we spend a lot of money on an outreach or something like that, but there's one person that was transformed, and that becomes the anecdotal data that justify that big spend. Where I think the actual data, and this is where even as we look at our digital offerings, and if you struggle with any of this, maybe you're in a small church and you're like, Jonathan, I don't get a team or people doing this. listen, a lot of this is very accessible, very simple. You may need someone like a Bart or someone to come alongside you to help coach you. But these are things that actually, it's never been easier to be small and nimble and to be able to use some of these tools. They're incredible. You just need to be interested in it enough to value it, that you can find the right people to help you build this out, because I do think curating that voice is critically important. So I'm going to head back to Dawn. I love, Dawn, that you mentioned the purple cow, because I read that back in, I think it was 2003. It was a transformative book by Seth Godin for me in terms of marketing and communications, and being noticed in a very busy industry. And so my question for you, Dawn, is the church is now emerging into what can only be called a very crowded space.
Yeah.
There's a lot of industries and voices that have been there a lot longer than us. So the question for me is, how do you stand out as the church or as a not-for-profit in this kind of space, in this kind of moment?
Yeah. And I guess just to say as well, I've been kind of scribbling furiously as I've been listening to the other guys chat, just really enjoying the conversation. And I think, and I'll come to your point about how to stand out, but I think that Jerry made a really interesting point about almost the or kind of typologies that we need to have when he talked about, the author, the tailor. You lost me with the accountant bit. Call that the scientist. I'm joking. I
was thinking data scientist, Dawn.
No, I get it completely. But I think there's a really interesting other point linked to that, which is what you're talking about there, and this is how you can be different and stand out. Is that great marketing? My favorite description of marketing is it's the fusion of logic and magic. And I think it's always stuck with me as a way to kind of describe what we do. And it is, particularly in the data-led world that we're in now, it's all about being able to, and it's complex stuff. This partially why I think marketing is so fascinating, because on the one hand, you're kind of a data scientist, and then you're a magician at the other end of the spectrum. For me, I kind of think, well, why would you want to be in any other job than marketing, right? So I think that then comes to how can one be different and stand out. Another thing that Iwata-san, who was my global president at Nintendo, used to say to all of us, actually. So just to put this in a commercial context, in the UK, before we launched the Wii, I had been there for a few years, and we were a failing market. So Nintendo had always been really successful in the US, in markets like France and obviously Japan. The UK had always been a Sega market. So we were in last place, market share of 5%, and our competitors, PlayStation and Xbox, had pretty much the rest of the market. And we were kind of like, oh, this Wii product looks really cool, really interesting, but how on earth are we going to be different, stand out, and all the rest of it? And I remember Iwata-san talking about how when we think about how to be different, actually our biggest threat isn't our competitors. It's actually human apathy, which is a really interesting way to kind of frame how one starts to think about being different. Because I think quite often our natural instinct is that kind of almost herd mentality of X, Y, and Z organization or church or whoever we deem to be our rivals are doing it this way. How are we different relative to them? Whereas I think there's a really interesting bit about how are you just different to everything that's out there. So again, a little bit of a kind of upstream thought on that, really. I think and I'm going to come to a few tips actually around maybe just some of my crazy creative thoughts, not knowing your world at all, but just utilizing the kind of creative part of my brain. But I do think there's a really interesting build, I think, on both Bart and Jerry's point around as we move to whatever this version of normal is, which is going to be constant new steps of evolution. I think that the necessity is the mother of invention piece. is also very pertinent right now. And particularly working with entrepreneurs, you've got so little resource. And, if we think about there's a church which has got very little resource around it, I still think that the best way to come up with big thinking, which is going to set you apart from everybody else, is to always, as well as thinking differently, think big. Think big, and you can work back from really big, but don't start small. If you start small, you're always going to be small. So if you think big, with your then resources that are available, think about how you're going to get to that big. And I think if you think that way, you're always going to think in a way that's probably maybe bolder and braver than if we perhaps think very incrementally. Now, not every marketer at all would say that, but certainly that's my own, I guess, brand of marketing, really. I think the other slightly philosophical bit, just to share as well, because I just thought it was really powerful. I'm a big fan of Ariana Huffington, and she wrote a piece this week about how COVID can create a new crucible. Just thought was really interesting. So she talked about how we're going through a period of profound trial and how we can emerge through the other side of it with something new and maybe even better. And I know we mightn't feel like that at the moment, but I think that idea, and I think the space for, I think for you guys to own is it's not just a new normal, it's actually a better normal, which I think is a really optimistic and hopeful way of kind of thinking about what that different looks like. Moving from slightly less philosophical into a less philosophical space, I guess. I think my tips around the how one might be standing out and different in a cluttered space would be, I think you guys can own the area of, we talk a lot about design-led thinking, about how we problem solve. And I think that the way you can maybe think about it is kind of a humanity-centered approach to how you problem solve. In kind of commercial world, we talk about user-centered thinking, and we start with the why and the problem. But I think in the world that you're in, a humanity-led approach, because I think the humanity is in a utterly different place to where it was 3 months ago, where we are our most authentic selves. We're stripped back. And so I think that there's a real opportunity, I think, there for yourselves, because I think there'll be much more of an appetite and an openness for people to try new things, to be more in touch with what the important things are, which is absolutely the world that you guys inhabit. And so I think what that idea of kind of start with the human experience, I think would be one thought around how to be different. I think that the second idea would be around how you co-craft and build your marketing and digital marketing communication with your congregations. Because again, I think that's where, activism, if we think about the opportunity to bring younger audiences who are extremely activist, who will be even more activist off the back of this experience, I think finding a way to kind of access that younger audience, it could be really interesting. And there might be tips and tricks around, cross-generational stories of how young and old are coming together through the crisis. And I think that the two more points really for me are around tone and brand personality and kind of how you want to be seen as a brand. I think it is really interesting. And I think some of the words that have been used would absolutely seem to be, the kind of areas to own, really, of that idea of the calm in the storm. I think reflection, kind of joy, I think still through this with possibly a small J, I think right now, but kind of these slightly strange moments of joy that we might be finding through this experience. And I think the final bit, I think, to touch on, I think Jerry was talking about, and I love this idea because I was scribbling it down, was actually you have all been storytelling through religion since, again, time immemorial. And I think owning storytelling, I think you could really innovate in that space. Again, on-demand content, bite-sized content. But I love the idea of perhaps, parables. If we think about parables, they were kind of short-form content, I guess, back in the day. And so I guess I think the final thought, I guess, would be, so a very tactical idea which I had just to share. So when I really like to think about marketing and with what you guys can communicate, I think there can be some surprise and delight in there. And we all need a bit of surprising and delighting in our lives right now, and for you guys to stand out. And so I've and this is a very executional thing, so bear with me, but I just think it's interesting. I've noticed actually that, he's a global star, so we all know him. Sir Patrick Stewart, I don't know whether you've noticed, has been on Twitter, I think every day, reading different sonnets from Shakespeare. And I kind of go, if you're thinking big, are there influencers or people that are religious and are kind of feeling they would, and I'm a big believer in just go out and ask them, send them an email, and could that be a series of storytelling of parables from famous people that could go viral, could create interest, be kind of like, whoa, I don't know whether I've seen stuff like this before. And apologies if there's a load of this stuff happening already. But I just thought, again, then the impact of the relatability that some people might bring. And again, that could maybe bring in different audiences for you. And I think finally, I guess my kind of concluding kind of thought in this space is I kind of feel that the part of the reason why I got really, I guess, excited about joining this conversation was around, the idea of marketing and communicating hope. I mean, I guess if I think marketing is the best job in the world and your job is to market hope, kind of doesn't get better than that, really. So I would just encourage anyone that's listening to kind of let their creativity run wild, really, in terms of how hope can be expressed in, it could be Sir Patrick Stewart reading a parable, but it could be a really, really small act of kindness that, again, from a comms point of view, it's genuine, it's authentic, it's real, and it could go viral and start to build even more kind of awareness. So they were kind of just some thoughts, really.
Just some throwaway thoughts, Dawn? Because it was amazing. Like, I've written down a ton of things. I've watched some things in the chat room. I never thought of marketing as a fusion of logic and magic, but even the think big aspect and that human apathy was the greatest enemy. And even the idea of surprise and delight. We've been surprised at some of the stuff that we've offered up that has gotten traction digitally that wasn't always the most meaningful. The stuff we thought was going to grab everyone got minimal. I think people love to laugh. I think people love to feel connected. I know our next gen team has been just exploring TikTok right now, and they did a video that has over 18,000 hits right now on it. And it was, to me, honestly, of all the stuff they produced, I'm shocked that was what taught people. But I realize it's a little of that surprise and delight, I think.
Yeah. And I guess also the other bit, just to why I kind of, you've probably guessed that I am Mrs. Marketing. I love it. Because I think actually marketing is also, the best marketers I've ever come across are two things. They are very philosophical and they are very anthropological, and they are deeply curious about the human condition. And I think that with faith in the world that you guys are in, that's exactly what you are as well.
Well, thanks, Dawn. And listen, I want to just encourage you because we're going to close up in just a minute and we want to get to some of your questions. If you have questions for Dawn, Jerry, or Bart, jump in the chat room right now. Get those questions in there so Richard can curate them and begin to voice them back to us. But let's switch to Bart. Bart, I'm just thinking of like a little bit of a practical offering actually as we kind of end the actual presentation part of it. Just thinking of if you were sitting in our shoes, let's say we're pastoring a church of 100 people, or we're leading a not-for-profit and it's a mid-size or small range not-for-profit, or we're sitting in a seat that has more scope. What would you say would be like a few practical next steps that you would consider taking in this moment? So, take it away, Bart.
Yeah, I do gotta say, Don, you took so much of what I was about to say right out of my mouth. I love the way you shared those type of details and information. So there's gonna be a bit of overlap, but I'm excited still because if it's good, then it's good. It's irregardless of the size of your audience. People get stuck on numbers, but you have to start somewhere, and you really do need to initially forget about how many people are in your purview of audience or anything like that. And we have to think differently that way. But the first thing that I would definitely say is it's a synonym for what you've been talking about, Don, is the why. And I call that language. Start to frame some language about who you are and what you are trying to portray. And it needs to be specific. So like Jerry mentioned, certain brands that are synonymous with certain language, like just do it or think different and stuff like that. And you have to understand that language is what connects us as humans. And that's how you engage and get somebody to commit at a deeper level. And you're going to see a more authentic version of marketing come out of this whole situation. So you want to be as authentic as possible in your approach and how you do that. The other thing is exactly what Don said. I had written down think big and then determine your next step. So think as big as you can, think as creatively as you can, and then from there, what fits in your budget, what fits in your context, what fits that aligns with your mission or your core values. But you have to start big. We have to break the cycle of small churches thinking that they have to copy big churches, and that doesn't help anything. We need to look at it from a perspective of what does God want to do through me and my church for this community here and now. And that's what's going to move the needle forward. And that's what we're really about for this whole conversation. How do we move our needle forward, and how do we get people cared for and hearing about what we're doing and engaging with us with what we're doing? Number 3, less about you, more about them. As organizations, it's easy to talk about ourselves. I would put every piece of content you put out or scheduled to be put out as how is this serving our audience, and in a real tangible way, not in a philosophical way. Really, how is this going to help them right here and right now? People want you to solve their problems, or people want you to speak to the problems. So where's the pain point, and how are we exactly going to do that? So right now, anxiety is high, self-care is high. All these different things are topics that people want to know and understand about. So every piece of content, how is this going to help them? Good. We're going to help them spiritually by talking about anxiety. We're going to help them with their mental health by speaking about how they can do self-care at home during this time. Every piece of content should be like that. Less about the organization itself, more about the missional active idea that you want to portray. Number 4, listen to the people. Again, the authenticity of it is going to be huge. And just like what Jerry said, having those KPI, those key performance indicators is great. Also listen to the behavior that they are going to be displaying, and what does that actually mean. Segmentation is going to be huge if you're not doing it already, in terms of splitting up your audience and finding out exactly how you can be serving them, like I just mentioned. And I think the last thing, number 5, would be trust the Holy Spirit. It's a very spiritual answer, but even in the marketing aspect of it, we have to lean on the Spirit of God to show us and to lead us and to allow us to dream these really big dreams. And we need God to empower us to then go out and do it. And because, like I said, there is so much to be desired, quote unquote, by this larger church with big numbers and have big social media presences, but it doesn't always translate to what you're facing and the people who really need you to be the hope and the light in that community. So you can have all the greatest strategies and you can copy anything that you see another church doing, but you really want to say, okay, I take all of this stuff and I submit it now to what God really wants for this congregation and how we can really be servants to God and to be servants to our audience as well.
Man, Bart, you just said so many great things there. I think even, I just saw someone mention in the chat room, you're less about you, more about them comment. And I think I follow a lot of people, a lot of organizations, certainly in faith world and in not-for-profit. And the more someone talks about if their digital feeds smack anything of self-preservation or about how you can help us, it's almost the quickest way for me to not want to watch it, because I think I am engaged in a little bit. I think we all are. Like, how is this speaking to me right now? How is this even applied to me right now? Why is this relevant? And I think, I love that, because what a great reminder for all of us. We eat, drink, and breathe what we lead. Other people don't. If they're coming into your orbit, it's because they have seen value added and there's something there that has connected to them. I love how you end with the Holy Spirit, because I'm a person of great faith, and I do believe that I'm curating the greatest message ever that anyone has had. And for me, that's an incredible privilege, but it's a huge responsibility. And Jesus always, when he walked this earth, you notice this with all of the narratives in the New Testament, he never once used his miraculous powers to benefit himself. Every time it was for the benefit of others. The opportunity he had to use it for himself, he didn't. He went through what he had to go through instead. And I think that heart is what's got to fuel our digital and our communication tools, because otherwise, I see it a lot in denominations and organizations. A lot of it is about them. And we're in a crowded space that is looking for them. We're not selling a product. I like how Dawn said, we're bringing hope. And so hope is going to be rooted in that we actually care about the person at the other end of this communication piece. So many good things said there, guys. I just wanted to turn to the panel. I don't know if there's any questions, but if there's any questions, Richard, how's it going in the chat room? Sure, yeah. Okay. Well, guys, appreciate you joining us at Stackable Church. And I just want to say, maybe each of you just want to give a final thought and a shout out on your way out. But I do want to say thank you, Dawn, Jerry, and Bart. I said this when we gathered before we went live. I'm so thankful for just such quality, smart, intellectually challenging, but creative leaders that were willing to give a donation of your time to help leaders in Canada lead in their context and communicate well. So I want to say from my heart, thank you, friends, for doing this.
Thanks for having us, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And just to say, as I mentioned at the start, it's been an absolute joy to do this with you. I enjoy doing things which are out of my comfort zone, and kind of your world isn't I've done lots of different things across my career, but this is a new box that I can tick. It's a new one on my bucket list. So hopefully, if there's just been any kind of help that I've given, then that's a good thing.
Well, thank you. Bart?
Yeah, if I would just challenge and encourage everyone who is listening, any organization or church, to, in this moment, instead of retracting, double down on what your core values are and how you can exemplify that online.
That's fantastic. I think we just we'll throw out one last question that has come in. Just it's for Dawn. How do I make my next gen team's messaging stand out in the context of the larger organization? So this is from someone that they lead a next gen team, which would be youth to young adults, but they're a part of a larger organization. How do they help their message stand out against the larger organization's messaging?
I mean, it's difficult to kind of know what the kind of context is, I guess, of kind of what the larger organization is. But I think if it's almost a sub brand, which is, I guess, is how I would be kind of thinking about it, it would almost be, almost what are the kind of parent brand benefits. So if I think about, when I'd be kind of selling sub products, so I'd have Nintendo as an umbrella brand, and then I'd have a Wii or a DS as a piece of hardware, and then I'd have a piece of software within it. You almost want to kind of benefit from the broader brand benefits and kind of keep those, I guess, in the background, because there's a value to be had with those. But I think it's very much then about, again, it's almost you've just got to, in some respects, actually just be clear around what you stand for. Obviously, that can't jar with what your kind of broader organizational kind of benefits and values are. They need to be, I guess, kind of additive, or they kind of chime with those. But equally, I think there's always a really interesting opportunity to kind of still be very kind of very sharp and clear about what your own unique benefits are as well. But in a way, I think the key is just so that they feel harmonious too and don't jar with, but are still different enough that you've got your own identity as well.
That's a great answer. I think I understand the context of this person is asking it. And I think it'd be like marketing the DS without the word Nintendo in front of it. You're losing the value added of the umbrella, but the DS brings a unique experience that you want to accentuate in the middle of it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, thank you, friends. Thanks for joining us online. As always, we're going to post this video on stackable.church so you can view it with your teams in the future. Richard's going to throw in the chat room just some upcoming talks with Stackable. We have a lot of experts who are willing to lend their time to the church and the not-for-profits. We're really grabbing outside of our areas of expertise to broaden. I like how Dawn said she jumped into a pool for the challenge of being in a religious stream that is maybe not been her comfort zone. And so I love that she walks right towards that. Well, we're pulling in voices from all over the place to be a part of this. And Richard will put into the chat room some of our upcoming talks. If you're not already, go to stackable.church, subscribe there so you get notification of all of our future live streams that you can be a part of. Again, thank you so much to Dawn Paine, Jerry Sen, Bart Anniston. And, I think in a practical way too, if you can throw in all the social media channels again for each of our communicators, that people have the opportunity to follow them. And, I think even in a practical sense, if you're a church leader or not-for-profit leader in Canada, if you're struggling with navigating all of this, I'd highly recommend Bart Anniston's voice, and you can again engage his firm that will be able to help you through this season as you kind of get down to the tactical in the trench. How do I do this level work? Bart's an expert, and he's certainly helped us at One Church Theo. So thanks again, friends. Have a great day. Have a great day, rest of the day in the UK. Dawn and Jerry and Bart in Toronto.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.